put some talc on. Actually, shine your lights.
All right, we'll go live. All right, this is the Committee on Government Operations, Public Safety, and Public Service. This is Thursday, April 18th, 2019. We're at 6 p.m. I have Councilor DePiero.
Present.
I have Councilor McLaughlin.
Present.
I have Councilor Della Sola.
Present.
We have 3 members present. We do have a quorum.
Please stand and salute the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item, Mr. Clerk.
The first piece of business, this is a resolution by Councilor Michael McLaughlin that is honor the mayor and CFO appear at this meeting to give an update on any recommendations that have been made from the School Review Commission and to see if any audit has been done from the school department and if a Blue Ribbon Commission has been formed.
Mr. Demas, thank you for being here. I know you're a bit under the weather, so we do appreciate it. We'll try to get you out of here as soon as possible.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Councilman McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just like to, again, echo your comments and thank Mr. Demas. I know he's pretty sick, so I appreciate you being here. If you can just give us an update. Last year, when we made the decision to transfer some money over to the school department, I'm sure you remember that the mayor and yourself came before us, and the mayor laid out some strong ideas of how to be able to fully understand school spending and be able to understand the operations of the school department financially. I think some of my colleagues, including myself, took that vote on the hopes and the sentiment that those measures that the mayor had laid out were going to be strong and we'd have a better understanding of finances come this budget season. We know the budget is right around the corner as you are working on it daily. So I'm wondering if you can give me an update on where we stand. I'll be honest, I don't know if this issue is going to be able to be put to rest tonight because depending on your information, it may be something that has to be reviewed or looked further upon. And I know we have to respect the 7-day period to be able to ask further questions beyond what's here tonight before us. So I'd just like to hear what you have to offer as far as information, and then we can kind of go from there, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. And first I wanted to say the mayor wishes that he could be here, but he's celebrating Holy Thursday with his family. Feel free to ask me whatever that I don't address with any of your questions, but in reading through your agenda items, there was a couple of things. First, the School Finance Review Commission, as defined by charter, very soon after the issue that you were talking about, the appropriation of the additional funds, that commission was formed, and that commission has been meeting regularly on a monthly basis. The members include what was originally prescribed by charter, but have also been expanded to include additional parties that may be beneficial. We actually had, at our next meeting, we're actually inviting all of the school principals in so that they can give information as to support what they're requesting in this year's budget. In addition to that, there was a Blue Ribbon Task Force that was created. That task force has been meeting since its creation, again, very shortly after that issue arose. It's been a long process. That process has been, as you're aware, there are a number of members and they're volunteers with very diverse professional and educational backgrounds in the municipal field. So getting them together when their schedules permit has been a little challenging. In addition to that, we've had some issues that arose over the school over the last year that have had some changes in the administration, and we've had to take that into account and let the dust settle, if you will, to make sure that we're all on the same page. I can tell you that the investigative portion of the Blue Ribbon Task Force has concluded, and they are right now in the process of drafting their report. Once that report has been drafted, they're going to share it with the city and the school administration to make sure that nothing is missed. That report's going to be comprehensive. It's going to address city finances overall, as well as the specific issues and situations that led that situation to get to the point where it did, as well as recommendations that the city and school can both do together to ensure that those situations don't happen. In addition to that, with the new changes in the administration, the city has developed a strong working relationship with the administration as it currently exists. As a matter of fact, I believe it was last week, I sat through with the school committee's finance review subcommittee and went line by line through their budget with them. They allowed me to be part of that process to make sure that the process is transparent and that everybody is aware, both on the city and the school side, as to what's being addressed, so that when the budget is presented to the city council, everybody will be on the same page and at least have an understanding as to why what's being requested is being requested. So we're in that process now.
So just to kind of follow along with your statement so we can be on the same page. So Chairman DePiero had given me a suggestion that I should request the minutes of the meeting from the school finance review through the city clerk, and I want to thank him because he did give me those minutes, and I did have the opportunity to read those minutes, and they were very helpful to be able to know the work that the committee is doing. The Ribbon Task Force had done sort of the same system in Somerville, and maybe in other communities, but I know that they had done the same sort of a task force in Somerville. I think they had real success in Somerville, and when I heard that the mayor was putting those individuals forward as their blue ribbon panel, I had hoped that we would see something before this budget season to help us understand the budget, knowing the success that they had in Somerville, and again, maybe other communities, but I know Somerville firsthand. Will we see something before the budget with that rough draft that you just spoke of that they're working on finalizing or creating?
Are you going to hold me to this?
I'm not holding you to anything.
Here is the goal.
No, I'm not holding you to anything.
I can't guarantee, but here is the goal. Originally, they wanted to have it out by the end of March. Now we're in the middle of April. The mayor made it very clear to them that he was hoping that their final product, because they have been successful in the past, he wanted before we started the budget process. Unfortunately, situations occurred this past year at the school department, which resulted in changes of the administration, which slowed some things down.
Would that have, and again, just would that have changed their work ability, whoever was the leader of the school department?
Yes,
It would have.
it would. And I think when you see the report,
Okay.
I haven't seen the report.
Okay.
I can tell you that over the last couple of weeks, I'm constantly getting phone calls from them or emails seeking additional clarification information to make sure that they have things correct on their end. So I know they're getting very close. They're in the process. It's being written as we speak. I actually just, at 5 o'clock, met with BJ Devereaux because he had received some questions from Mr. Sam Tyler from the Boston Municipal Research Group. And he just wanted to make sure it was okay to release information. So as recently as an hour and 10 minutes ago,
Sure.
they were receiving
working on
additional
it.
information. They understand the need for us to have that information as part of this year's budget process. So I really hope that we are going to have something from them, even if it is in draft form. Given the diligence that they put into this, I think between the issuance of a draft report and a final report is going to be very quick, just given their level of thoroughness.
Sure. And just a couple of last questions, and I'll end my comment. One is, what happened? I'm sorry, Mr. Dees. What happened with the operational audit that the mayor had talked about? And again, there's two different audits. You can have a financial audit and an operational audit. Operational audit shows best practices, what we're spending the money is on. Are we doing that operational audit? Is that in the process? Are we getting anywhere with that, or?
Well, when you actually look at the duties and responsibilities of the School Finance Review Commission and what that group is tasked with, that is an operational audit, if you will. Because every month what we're doing is, meeting monthly, is we're dealing with enrollment issues, we're dealing with not only their operating budget, with their new hires, we're dealing with anybody from the commission has the ability to look at any expenditures that are spent on a monthly basis.
I'm sorry. I
Principal
thought we were going to
requests.
see a third-party company come in and do an operational audit of the school department.
At this point, we don't feel that that's necessary, given that we have all the information from the schools. We have complete and full access and transparency from the schools. All of their non-payroll expenditures go through my office, so those are reviewed on a regular basis. And we're in the process of developing, and through working with the school, a better collaboration between the city's HR department and the payroll staff over at the school department. Because again, when you cut down to it, the issue that arose was really driven by the 97 positions that were added outside of the budget process. Those 97 positions created the $5.5 million issue. So it was driven primarily by payroll. Now, there were other unanticipated costs, and they happen every year, and those are normal. But when you get down to it, those 97 positions created a $5.5 million increase in appropriations.
And will those be before on the budget in this fiscal year?
I can tell you, especially having gone through that entire proposed budget with the school's finance review subcommittee, every single position that they plan on having will be included in the budget and will be transparent. So the situation that happened 2 years ago has been rectified. They understand the issue, and I can tell you the school committee is in full agreement that any proposed positions will be included in the budget and will not be left out.
And I had the opportunity to read the minutes from the school finance, but will we see an actual set of recommendations from the School Finance Review Commission before the budget that they recommend step A, B, C, and D be taken during this budget session?
What you're going to see is hopefully the report from the Blue Ribbon Task Force.
No, beyond that,
Right. Those are going to address the internal issues that created it. So, for example, before any employee is added to the city's payroll, we create a add change form, a personnel sheet. And one of the steps that we have in that is for the budget director to sign off saying there's an available appropriation. So we're working, so without her signature saying that there's an available appropriation, we can't hire anybody. So we're taking the controls that we already have on the city side and implementing them on the school side. What you will see, and it was canceled last week because, actually we had a meeting scheduled for tonight for the School Finance Review Commission, but that's postponed until next week, where we're meeting with all of the principals, of which, just like last budget process, the School Finance Review Commission will make a recommendation as to the City Council as to what we feel we can support for a budget. But again, that commission is only advisory. There is no binding authority to the School Finance Review Commission.
Correct. So, Mr. Stevens, you talk about the $5.5 million being in salaries being the large portion of the problem from last year with the 97 positions. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, City Council appropriated, and it actually goes back 2 years, but yes, City Council appropriated $5.5 million, and those 97 positions equated to approximately $5.5 million, so.
So it wasn't the student population that was increasing, that was growing, that was.
Well, I think what you're gonna see, there are a number of
So I'm just
issues.
looking to, like, what to look for in this coming budget season versus what we've seen in years past. That's all, I'm just trying to, if there's any red
So
flags
last year,
of anything
so last
that
year
we
there
should
was an
look at.
improvement in the budget process as far as what the school presented. You're gonna see a continued improvement this year. And I think it's gonna be a constantly continual improvement as the city and the school are continually working together better and collectively.
Okay. So there'll be no operational audit from a third party, and we'll have a rough draft, hopefully, by the middle of May from the Blue Ribbon Commission. And then included in that Blue Ribbon Commission will be the recommendations from the School Finance Review Commission?
No, the recommendations from the School Finance Review Commission, from the task force.
The task force.
The task force. Those will be solely based upon the work of the task force.
And when will we see those recommendations? Or when can we expect to see that?
Again, they're in the process of wrapping up that report now, so hopefully very soon.
So, again, I apologize. I'm just a little confused, so I just want to get this clear. So, the Blue Ribbon Task Force is wrapping up their
Yes.
their report. They'll come out with that maybe middle of May. The School Finance Review Commission is going to have some recommendation to the City Council before budget season?
Well, the recommendation is going to be what, based upon the work from the prior year, will be
What's presented.
what we can, as presented, what we can support for a budget number to City Council.
Okay.
Given the fact that the School Finance Review Commission meets on a monthly basis, goes over all the expenditures, goes over enrollment, goes over state aid, goes over all of the school's revolving funds, staffing issues, class size. These are issues that are discussed every single month
So
during
then
those meetings.
Would it be good to get a report to all of the city councils of the minutes? So Clerk Cornelio issued the minutes to me for all the meetings, but maybe we should get it out to all the members so that they can all have the opportunity to look at what the work has been done since the commission has been.
We can arrange for that through our clerk, right?
What's that?
We can arrange
clerk.
for that through our.
I'm just thinking if
Yeah.
that's possibly an option, that, so that everybody can say, okay, this is how we got here, and this is where
We can arrange for that.
we have arranged,
It's
you
a
know,
good idea.
That's where we
Absolutely.
arrived to.
Because those meetings are lengthy and they go into a great depth of detail.
And they do, and I
as
read a
to
lot
what's
of it.
going on with
And
the
I can
operational
attest,
aspects
I
of
can
the
attest
schools.
that within those minutes.
Oh, you're right,
It's
Mr.
very
Murray.
evident where the problem was, and it was even self-proclaimed by an individual, how the budget fiasco came into play. And I can attest to what Mr. Demas said. Since then, there's been a much improved working relationship between city government and the school committee as a whole, the school administration. And our job on the School Finance Review Commission isn't just to be a watchdog of every dollar spent. It's to make sure that we're really maximizing the potential with every dollar spent, meeting our students' needs and addressing those concerns as classroom size and everything that Mr. Demas laid out. 100%
As
agree
well
with.
as the reduction in state aid. I mean, let's not
Right.
forget, I think really what precipitated this whole issue is when the state actually changed how they calculated their state aid under Chapter 70, specifically dealing with our economically disadvantaged student population. Whereas those kids didn't go away, but the state stopped counting them.
I'm all set for right now, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council President Delasola?
Good evening. The biggest issue is, you were talking about earlier about getting the information to us before the budget. I think it's just so important if we have to push this, like we just talked about. I had a few questions, but you answered them through the counselor. To know what went wrong and how to improve it before we do the budget. And I like the idea of the budget now is including the school budget, the 97 teachers that we had the issue last year. So I think it's great, but I just like to see the information, if it's to us through an email, through the minutes, or the final result of the audit. So when the budget comes up, we know where the faults were and how to improve everything, because that's all we're here for.
Certainly.
So if you could,
Yeah, I certainly think it, reading through those minutes every month, we address all of these issues. We address class size. We address head counts with teachers, as well as when the school department came during this last budget cycle and was seeking the supplemental appropriation from additional monies that were generated out of the state. They made very specific claims as to where they were going to, how they were going to utilize that money to mitigate class size. And the School Finance Review Commission followed up on that and asked for presentations and said, where are these individuals? And how did it have an impact on class size? So all of that information, or all of those discussions are actually backed up by hard numbers now, something that we haven't had in the past. So things are much more transparent on the school side now.
and on the print, you say the principals are going to come up and speak to us?
School
Speak to
Finance
School
Review
Finance and
Commission.
tell them what they're looking to improve, the teachers, whatever else they need.
And I'm certain that during the budget process, when the school committee, when the city council is reviewing the school department's budget, I'm sure if you guys wanted to have numerous meetings in regards to the school budget, because it is the largest budget within the city's overall budget, for yourselves to address principals as well, just like you address department heads. I'm sure that this, can't speak for them, but given our improved interaction with them, I'm sure that the administration wouldn't have a problem with you speaking with the principals directly and inviting them up to speak.
That's a good idea. All right,
I think that next
thank you
meeting,
very
my
much.
clerk just informed us that it's May 2nd in this chamber, I believe, if anyone does want to attend.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Napolitano?
Thank you. All right, so you've made it clear that the unrecorded employees last year was part of the problem, but that wasn't the sole problem. We still also had the problem with the change in the formula. And these are areas that are being addressed. The new budget will include and account for all employees that are going to be working for the school department. You know, we know the senator is working on the aid part of it. So, you know, I think it's important to get the information, but it's also to have confidence that the school review commission, as in an advisory capacity, has addressed these issues and would not be sending it forth to us with a new budget unless those issues are addressed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's more about how we move forward than it is how we got there in the first place.
Yes.
Fair? Okay. Again, I just hope we all keep that in mind, because, again, what's done is done. We move forward. Let's move in so these issues don't continue, and that they are resolved, and that we're accounting for all the employees. Because, again, anything that's unaccounted for is money that we're taking away from the kids, and we can't afford to let that happen.
Certainly.
There was one other thing I just wanted to reiterate, too, because I know my colleague had questions about regarding an audit. But an independent audit is only when there's due cause, correct? You have to find, the reason, and this is more for clarification, my colleague, the reason we're not doing an independent audit is because we're not finding discrepancies or any malfeasance. We're not finding any issues that would cause us to want to look deeper with an independent source. Is that correct?
That is correct. Every penny is accounted for, and when I made my initial presentation, the night that it was addressed originally by City Council, every dollar flows through my office. I know what they're spending the money on. The problem was that we had procedures that are in place on the city side weren't in place on the school side.
And that's been remedied now.
And that now has been remedied.
Okay. And that's really what it's about, creating consistency, transparency, and not raising questions unless there's due cause that there's anything malicious being addressed.
Absolutely, and I think, given the fact that the mayor and city council had appropriated so much above net school spending last year, knowing that there were issues due to the reductions in state funding, I think you guys as a group helped with this issue as well, and took a lot of those financial constraints and burdens off of the school department that they were facing when the state went through and made those cuts. So I think you guys have all been part of the process as well.
So I'm content that the past year has been a severe learning process, but it has been a learning process for us, and it's allowed us to put in steps that will now now result in a smoother transition or a smoother operation. Would you agree?
I would, and I would say just, as I've said that, this is a very strong working relationship between the city administration and the school administration. I gotta believe that it's the first time that I've been aware that anybody in my position has been invited and allowed to participate during the school committee finance review budgetary preparations, and has been allowed to be part of that process in the interest of transparency and working together as a team.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Demas, just explain to me, so when you spoke to us last year, you told us that it was not going to be a financial audit, that the financial audit would be whether or not there was some discrepancies over monies. It was going to be an operational audit to show best practices, to show that if we're paying for school buses to transport one of our sport teams, that we're using school buses and not coach buses, or whatever the case is. That was the audit that the administration was laying out. It was not a financial audit to say that X amount of dollars was missing, or something was not found, or something was. Am I correct by saying that it was an operational audit to show best practices at all levels?
You are, and I'm guessing that you read the last month's minutes, because we actually did talk about buses, and we did talk about looking into cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not it would make sense for us to purchase our own buses, even if they were used.
And I did read that report today, to be honest with you.
Just knowing what was discussed at last meeting, what I can tell you is that originally that was proposed for us to go out and hire somebody to do this.
Right.
However, going through the School Finance Review Commission process, and every month those meetings getting stronger and stronger and better, combined with the work that is being done by the task force, we feel that we're addressing those issues internally without having to spend external resources.
No, and that's great, and I think we have a lot of great members on that School Finance Review Commission that are trustworthy individuals and that have done good work. I just wanted to make sure that the people at home didn't think that there was something that was not, that there was a financial matter that was overlooked. It was an operational audit. It was about best practices on all levels and what we could do and how we could spend our monies better to keep more money in the classrooms and more on education.
Fair point, and just to reiterate, the city does have an annual financial statement audit
Yep.
done every single year, which includes all departments, which includes the school departments. As part of that audit, we have a number of federal grants that are audited. The majority of those are at the school departments. So every financial aspect that the city's audited, the schools are included in that as well. So, and I'm very happy to report that we are receiving very clean audits. There have been some reports where we need to work on some issues that were identified during the audit over at the school department, but they're more from an internal control standpoint. But
that's
at no
and that's most recently, Mr. Dees?
Yes, but what I can tell you is there's no malfeasance that's been discovered, no misuse of funds. Our audits are clean.
So, and that's really good. That's really good to hear. I'm just wondering if we should table this for 1 month and allow that report to come out from the Blue Ribbon Task Force, and then we can take a look at it at that point and understand it better. And maybe we invite somebody that worked on putting that task force, on putting that report together, so that if we do have questions, we can get them answered. I'm not sure if that should happen in committee of the whole, or if that should happen here. But I think that we should have a discussion about the draft that we've all been waiting to see. It's kind of like the Mueller report. We've all been waiting to see a report come out and.
No redactions.
And hopefully it's in depth, and I'm sure it's gonna be in depth, because I do know what they did in Somerville. Like I said, most of that, I think that whole board was the board that went through the Somerville school systems, and they made a big difference in Somerville.
If I could suggest from the chair, it's the will of
You
the
can, Mr.
members here, where we are going to be having our school budget meetings pretty soon. It's the will of the body, but perhaps we can make a recommendation to refer this to the clerk to furnish us with the minutes prior to our first meeting in May, and then go from there with the budget process. Instead of having several meetings with different groups, let's bring everyone to the same table. It is essentially a committee of the whole, the budget committee. We can do it there, Mr. Demas.
So they would issue the report from the Blue Ribbon Task Force to at that committee?
The minutes of the School Finance Review Commission, and if it is available by the second Monday of May, our next council meeting, because the next one's this Monday evening, I think that would be an okay idea.
And I can tell you, I've been at almost every single meeting of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, and they have discussed that once they have it done and finalized, they do plan on, as a group, I don't know if all of them will be there, but a couple of them will be there, and they want to make a presentation to City Council, so that they
Excellent.
can make their presentation and answer any questions that you may have at that time.
So then I'm gonna make a motion that we, I'm sorry, let me yield the floor to Councilman Napolitano. I know he has something to say.
Counselor?
And again, this has to do with a conversation I had with the administration last year. The Blue Ribbon Commission is not limited solely and strictly to the schools, is that correct? They're also evaluating city policies and spendings?
They're looking at the city as well.
Okay.
Not to the extent from an expenditure standpoint, but from an overall standpoint of the city's finances, capabilities, looking forward in the future, what our abilities to help fund the schools. I think what they wanted to do is provide the city council with a lot of context as to what the issues are.
Right, because if you don't address one side, you can't address one piece of the puzzle without addressing the entire puzzle. I would
That's
think.
the way they view it as well.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that was the primary concern. Well, again, I think we're going to be reviewing all of this regardless, whether we keep it in committee or not. I don't think it's necessary to keep it in committee, because we will get the information either way. But whatever the councilman wants to do, I'll consider my response based on that motion. Thank you.
Just one comment on Chapter 70. There was no cuts, but it was just not as much as we wanted to get, correct?
We should be getting more because of the formula
Should be
change. The
getting more
funding
because of
wasn't
formula.
cut per se, it's that it's not as
Correct.
much as we should be getting.
Should be getting
So
more.
no one in the state is pulling money from us. I know our Senator DiDomenico and Representative McGonigal are fighting hard
They are.
to get that formula changed to get us some more state funding, so I
Correct.
thank them for their work.
It's not what we
on the
wanted,
Hill.
but they're fighting to get more for us, and we'll hopefully find out what that's gonna be.
Yep.
I know they're fighting hard, and I just hope
They
they
are.
continue to fight
They are.
very hard. Because the issue needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
And it's not just the economically disadvantaged change in the funding schedule. It is everything from the teachers' pensions to adequately funding special education, ELL students. It's a bigger overall issue that needs to be addressed.
Correct.
There are numerous bills being contemplated at the state right now, part of it going through the budget process. I know the senator and the rep are working very hard.
They are.
Hopefully, we can get some substantial change during this budget process, if not maybe next. But to fully fund schools, I think, is going to take probably about a 7-year process for the state to implement.
We'll take every dollar.
Absolutely.
Coun-
I just hope they address the gateway communities
Correct.
sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Because Everett as a gateway community with the other 12 to 13, it's really had a direct impact on our operating
Yep.
budgets.
That's
And-
right.
And the kids are the ones that are suffering.
They suffer.
No, Councilor Del Sol and I were at Malden High School a few months ago regarding this matter, and we saw the gateway, how it
Yeah.
impacts gateway communities versus the suburban communities and other communities, but the 16 cities is really impacted in a big, major way. So I think it's a good discussion. I think I'm looking forward to seeing the task force report to understand where we move forward this year in the budget so that we can have a true budget of the school department as well as the city. And I'd make a recommendation on Chairman DePiero's recommendation that we refer this to the city council meeting for the second meeting in May with the hopes that we will see the report from the Blue Ribbon Task Force and ask that the clerk put together the minutes of the School Finance Review Commission for the past year so that all of our members can have that to review before we go into the budget meetings. And I think with the recommendations from Mr. Demas, that possibly we bring up the principals this year and we have a conversation with them and possibly even maybe multiple meetings on the school budget. Maybe this year is the year that we maybe need to have a second meeting or a more in-depth meeting on understanding the school budget, I think is going to be for the first time helpful to the budget process.
Thank you.
Before Councilor Napolitano speaks, I just want to clarify your motion, Councilor McLaughlin, 'cause I had suggested that we refer it to the city clerk to give us the minutes and let it fall off there, where we are going to meet as a team, so to speak, on the budget in the near future.
I thought you were asking to go to the second meeting and
To have the
refer.
minutes before then, because our next meeting is this Monday. I don't want to have people rushing around trying to get us stuff over the weekend.
Mr. Chairman, I would second that with the exception of us having a conversation or a meeting with the principals. We're not the school committee. If we insert ourselves to having the principals come up here to answer questions to us, I believe we're overstepping our bounds in regards to the charter. So let's not mix things because we want to do things the school committee men can do. If you want to do that, then run for the school committee. But otherwise, we have to accept the information that we receive from them at its face and act on that information. So let the school department and the school committee deal with its conversations for budgeting with the principals. We'll get the end result, and that's really all we have ever needed to be able to move on and make a decision. So that would be my only opposition to the motion, is the part that included the principals.
I would agree.
It's not our place.
Mr. Chairman, I was just taking the recommendation from our auditor, but I agree with Councilor Napolitano.
So
that-
the motion we'll move forward with is to refer this item to our city clerk to furnish every member of the city council with the minutes of the Finance Review Commission at our first meeting of May, prior to the
Second that.
Our second meeting in May, not first meeting in May, right?
first.
It's May 2nd. It's May 2nd.
And that was seconded?
Right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the ayes have it. Thank you very much, Mr. Demas.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
All right. Item number 2 is a resolution up by Council Della Sola as president, that a representative of the mayor's office, Mr. Tony Sills from Planning and Development, and a representative for the engineering office appear at this meeting to give an update on the progress of the Ferry Street construction project.
I see Mr. Benevento and Mr. St. Louis here. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. hit the button on the microphone, please, so it turns green. Thank you.
Oh, when it's green?
Yes.
There we go. All right, I guess I'm on. To give you an update on this, on the project, the project is advancing, is advancing great. I'm going to go through a little bit of project history, how we got there, some of the aspects of the project, and then I'll be available for 600 or 700 questions if you have them. So, all right. So, why don't we just kind of go through it? So, just a little bit in terms of an update or a little history on the project. So, in August of 2013, the city made a request to Mass DOT to consider the Ferry Street project for federal and state funding. That project request ends up going to Mass DOT. It's a lengthy process. You have to do a project need form, then you do a project information and a project initiation. It went to the Mass DOT's Project Review Committee in April of 2014, and they approved the project, which is a huge milestone. And then in September of 2014, the city entered into an agreement with WorldTech. By the way, just for the record, Rich Benevento, president of WorldTech Engineering. I forgot to start with that, right? Although I think you know who I am. But so in any case, we started the design in September of 2014, and then in November of 2016, the preliminary design was submitted to Mass DOT for review. Because it's in an out year on the Transportation Improvement Program, they have a certain amount of days to review that preliminary design. Also, and I'll get into the design aspects and Mass DOT reviews in a minute, but it's a rigorous process. In August of last year, we had the Mass DOT design public hearing at the Conley Center. I think, I do believe Councilor Capone was there. Were you there as well?
Yes, I was.
So we didn't have a great
I think
showing. Oh,
most
you were
of
there
the
as well.
councils
Great,
were there.
excellent. We didn't have a great showing. As a matter of fact, I think a couple of people showed up because they thought the concert was that night as opposed to the presentation on Ferry Street. But nonetheless, if you were there, you saw it's a pretty formal process. They take a verbatim transcript of the hearing and so forth. But that's, again, a huge milestone in terms of the project advancing. In August of that same year, this past August, we started the final design. And you'll notice it says final design, but you see 75%, 100% PS&E. PS&E is plans, specs, and estimates. That's the final submission. But there are several design submissions that go to Mass DOT. The 75% design submission, we're in the process of completing the 75% design right now. Just to give you a little idea of the review process at Mass DOT, it doesn't go to, say, one or two people. It goes to several departments, both in Boston and at the district office in Arlington. So traffic looks at it, environmental looks at it, complete streets looks at it, right-of-way looks at it, traffic operations look at it. There's a whole pile of reviews that this goes through, both in Boston and at the district office. So we receive comments from them, written comments, and we're actually going through those comments right now. The design public hearing generally can't happen until we receive all the comments and address some of them. Some of them we don't really address until we get into the 75% design phase. So that's what's going on right now. Mass DOT is very adamant about making sure these projects advance because it involves federal funds. And you know what happens with federal funds. If you don't use them, you lose them. So we have to submit design schedules to Mass DOT every month, like where we are with the design, what's next, what's coming up, and that sort of thing. I also attend the Boston MPO meetings. And Jay Monty, fortunately the city of Everett has a voting member of the MPO, and Jay is there. I just recently gave the MPO an update on where the project was because if they feel like there's a project is at risk in terms of being available for advertising for construction, they'll shift it out of a particular tip year. This project, as it turns out, is actually in the 2020 tip, which is really good given the magnitude of the project. Just a little bit in terms of the scope of the project. So originally the project started at Revere Beach Parkway, South Ferry Street, and extended northerly up to the Malden City line. Had discussions with the mayor and his staff, and there was a suggestion that, gee, can we include Elm Street with this as well? So I went back to Mass DOT, we spoke with them, and they actually included Elm Street as well, from Ferry Street all the way up to the Revere City line. So this is a mega project. This is a pretty big project. Just in terms of the project length, so the Ferry Street section is about 7,500 feet, about 1.5 miles. Elm Street is a little under 1 mile, and then we have sections of Chelsea Street and Broadway just to that include the approach roadways and things like that. So the total project is just under 2.5 miles. Again, this is a big project. There are 8 signalized intersections within the project limits. 7 of them are on Ferry Street. 4 of them will be upgraded. That's Arlington, Nichols, Elm, Broadway, and Shoup, Glendale. Will all be upgraded with all new traffic signal equipment. The other 3 will be removed or be modified in some way. So, for example, Ferry, South Ferry, and Chelsea Street, those signals will be removed and a roundabout will be installed there. The signal at Union is not warranted, so that one will be removed. And the signal at Rich Street, which doesn't really operate well, will be replaced with a rapid flashing beacon. One of the things with Mass DOT is we had to do a comprehensive functional design report and traffic study as part of this project. The documents, there's several documents and they're several inches thick. The traffic counts at Union Street, for example, did not meet traffic signal warrants. If the signal does not meet warrants, it's deemed to not be appropriate, it's deemed to be unsafe. And based on the signals that would be at Elm Street and the roundabout, there would be sufficient gaps, because I know a lot of times say, well, if you take the signal out, how are people going to get in and out? And based on the analysis, there would be sufficient gaps to be able for people to access and egress from Union Street without a problem. There's one signal on Elm Street as well, that's Elm and Springvale, that also did not meet warrants, and so that signal is proposed to be removed as well and replaced with a rapid flashing beacon. Again, this is not necessarily for vehicular traffic, because based on the traffic counts, we would not need signals for vehicular traffic, but we always want to ensure that we're including safety improvements for pedestrians and bikes. So that's why is the installation of those rapid flashing beacons. And if you've seen those, they're pretty effective. Someone hits that button, those lights are flashing, and people know that there's a pedestrian crossing. Again, as I said, the funding for the project, it's on the 2020 TIP, which is huge. This project was probably one of the highest scoring projects in the Boston MPO. They look at all sorts of things in terms of traffic safety, environmental justice, which is making sure that equity, financial equity, so that really what that comes down to, you don't do projects just in the affluent neighborhoods, you do projects in all neighborhoods. So the project scored very high. It was one of the highest scoring projects in the Boston MPO, which is why even before we had our public hearing, they had already programmed the project on the TIP. That's huge. Usually they don't program a project until after you get past your design public hearing, but this project has a lot of regional significance and the need is very high, so they actually program the project. Right now, the Mass DOT is carrying the project at $18.5 million. It's likely by the time we're finished with the design, that number could go up even further. You'll see the funding sources, CMAQ, HSIP. Just so you know what those are: congestion mitigation, air quality, highway safety improvement program, surface transportation program. Essentially what that means is that there are several buckets of federal money, and when they have a project of this magnitude, they pick money out of each one of those buckets. Because of the various aspects of the project. So HSIP, for example, handle high-hazard intersections and dangerous intersections. CMAQ, congestion mitigation, air quality. Those are things like that because we're accommodating pedestrians and bikes. So they can take money out of all of those different federal buckets. The project is also going to include the replacement of the water main on Ferry Street. This is a great opportunity for the city. You'll see it says non-participating, which means that the city is paying for the water main. The rest of the project is 100% construction funded, 100%. So 80% comes from the federal government, 20% comes from the state. New sidewalks, complete reconstruction of the roadway, traffic signals, street lighting, landscaping, everything, 100% construction funded. The city's taken advantage of the fact that the road's going to be dug up, so let's replace that 100-year-old water main while we have the road dug up, because all we have to do is pay for the pipe. We don't have to now pay to reconstruct the roadway. As you see elsewhere in the city, we replace the water main, we have to spend the money to fix the roads. The road's already dug up, so let's put the water main in. So you really get a bigger bang for the buck to do that as part of the project. Just some of the existing issues that we've looked at on the project, certainly intersection geometry and operations, poor intersection sight distance, outdated traffic signal equipment, substandard pedestrian network, lack of ADA compliant wheelchair ramps, varied sidewalk conditions. We have concrete in some places, we have asphalt in other places, we have heaving sidewalks. You know, it's just really not conducive to accommodating pedestrians. Crosswalks without advanced signing or visibility. There are several pedestrian crash clusters. We know we had a couple of fatalities on Ferry Street over the years with pedestrians involved. Really no bicycle accommodation to speak of. Drainage deficiencies all over the place, so that is part of the project. Lack of stormwater quality devices, pondings on the edge of the roadway, things like that. And of course, poor pavement condition, just general pavement degradation. We know that the gas company came through last year and replaced the gas line on Ferry Street. The patch is probably the best part of Ferry Street right now. I mean, it's so the street is in complete disrepair. So one of the things that we try to do is realign the intersections. We install new traffic signals. As I mentioned, the roundabout at Ferry and Elm, and I have a graphic that I'll show you in a few minutes. Reconstruct the sidewalks, provide dedicated bike lanes where we can. If not, we provide sharrows. In some cases, we recently had a discussion about, even by Glendale Park, getting the bike lane off the roadway and providing a shared use path off of the roadway. We've been in discussions with Mass DOT about that. The Complete Street folks at Mass DOT are very adamant about making sure we're accommodating bicycles and pedestrians. So we've been working with them. Replacing the drainage system. Again, the project includes a complete revamp of the drainage system. As I mentioned, replacing the water main, a full depth reconstruction of the roadway. One of the things with Ferry Street, sometimes we'll try and do like a mill and overlay if the pavement's in not that bad a condition. The thing with Ferry Street, we know we have train tracks under the street. We know we have cobbles under the street. You can't grind a street like that. This will be a complete reconstruction, so they'll have to rip all that stuff right out. That'll certainly add to the cost of the project for sure. And then again, the city of Everett has an adopted complete street policy. These projects have to comply with complete streets, regardless of whether the city had a policy or not. As a matter of fact, probably one of the more stringent reviews at Mass DOT is the Complete Streets Review, making sure that we're accommodating all of that.
Mr. Benevento, can you just briefly explain what a complete street policy is so people at home understand?
So Complete Streets is really accommodating all users. In the past, back in the days when it was Mass DPW and then Mass Highway, you know, they would say, we're in the business of moving cars. Mm-hmm. It's no longer moving cars. We have to accommodate all users. So who are all the users? Well, certainly cars, pedestrians, bikes, and transit. They all are part of that mix. So it's no longer just moving the cars. We have to accommodate all of that. And a Complete Streets policy is doing that. Now, the Complete Streets policy that the city has, like many communities have, a lot of that is just to be making sure that when Public Works is doing a project, that they're being mindful that there's a complete street policy and they're accommodating to that as best they can. Similarly, if you have developers doing work in town, and I just did a peer review for the parking lot that Wynn is doing, one of my comments was, are we accommodating to the greatest extent practical the city's complete street policy? How are we addressing pedestrians crossing the street? How are we addressing when the bus drops folks off at that parking lot? Are we addressing them safely? Things like that. So Complete Streets, again, it's really a broad brush of all users, not just cars. So, did I answer the question? Probably more than you wanted to hear, right? So just some of the things, just in terms of some of the things we look at in terms of what the existing cross-section is and what the proposed cross-section will be. And just so we know that sections of Ferry Street, certainly when you get to Glendale Park, it's nice and wide. We can do more there. But generally, the cross-section on Ferry Street is a 50-foot cross-section. That's the right-of-way. It's 50 feet. So how do we fit all of these complete streets things in a 50-foot cross-section? Because oftentimes, particularly in a dense urban setting, where you don't have a big right-of-way. I mean, out in Utah, they have a 150-foot right-of-way. You can do all sorts of things. In New England and Massachusetts, some of these roads were laid out by the King of England. They're very narrow. I mean, try and do a project in Marblehead is pretty difficult, right? So essentially, we're trying to fit 10 pounds in a 1-pound bag. But what you can see is we have variable width travel lanes, lack of bicycle accommodations, and this is just a section from Chelsea Street to Broadway. The proposed cross-section will be to have a dedicated bike lane on one side. We'll add sharrows on the other side. We'll have consistent lane widths. And what is going to happen at some point, we're going to have a shared bike lane. Right now, we're showing it as a bike lane and parking. But eventually, once the city has been in discussions with the MBTA, do we end up with a shared bike lane so we can do that bus rapid transit that's been successful on Broadway? So we're looking at that so that we can make sure that if that does happen, we can accommodate it in the future. In terms of like Ferry Street to Rich Street, we don't have a lot of room there. There is not a lot of right-of-way. Again, it's a 50-foot right-of-way, but in order to maintain parking, we would have to have sharrows in the roadway. Everyone knows what the sharrows are. Those are the marks in the pavement that essentially says you're sharing the road with vehicles as well. In terms of parking, too, I want to bring that up, is we are maintaining parking. All legal parking spaces are being maintained. In the case of Chelsea Street at South Ferry and Ferry, I'm going to show you the roundabout. We actually created a parking area there. But there are some locations within the project limits where there is parking that really shouldn't be there. It's either too close to a curb or to an intersecting street or that sorts of things. So what we're trying to do is clean some of that up. Here are the improvements that you would see. You can see the existing conditions on your plan, on your handout, and you can also see where the roundabout is. So what does this do? First of all, it improves traffic operations. When we did the functional design report and did the capacity analysis, the roundabout actually operates better than the traffic signal that is there right now. And you folks live here, so you know what it's like going through that intersection, particularly at, what's that? Right. How does it work right now? Not so good, yeah. So this actually will operate much better. It also provides for landscaping opportunities. And if you look in the upper right side of the graphic, you'll see that we've created a parking area, which is protected. So people can actually pull in there and they don't have to worry. Right now, you can see where the parking is in that same area. People are backing out into traffic. So what we were able to do is provide protected parking for those folks to be able to pull in there and then pull out and navigate it easily. So again, the improvements here, painted bike lanes. One of the other things too that's important about this is that for pedestrians crossing, particularly crossing roundabouts, it's much easier for them to cross because they cross halfway, they have a refuge island, and now they can look the other way. Instead of, if you're crossing a street with two-way traffic, you've got to look both ways, see who's coming on either way. This particular, with a roundabout, you can get halfway out, you're in a refuge area, and you can now look the other way, and you only have to really look at traffic coming from one direction at a time. And those crossing distances are shorter. Again, if you look at the picture on the left, you can see how long those crosswalks are, and then look at the graphic on the right, and you can see those crosswalks are a lot shorter. Makes it a lot safer for pedestrians crossing. As we approach Broadway, certainly a much wider section, but we have a lot of things to do there. trying to accommodate the traffic through that intersection. So you can see that we have a left, if we're heading westbound, we have a left turn lane, a dedicated left turn lane. We also have a dedicated right turn lane, and then you can see there's a dedicated bike lane going through there. So they have their own bike lane. This is the area where Mass DOT was asking if we would be able to accommodate from Elm Street down to Broadway to have that separated bike lane so that it's not dealing with the traffic. So we're looking at that right now. A lot of traffic going through this intersection, all new traffic signals here, and landscaping opportunities as well with the islands and so on and so forth. So we're also very mindful of the fact that Glendale Park is there. So we wanted to make sure that the pedestrian accommodation would be well suited for that. You'll also notice that you see those crosswalks, they also go to islands. Makes it a little easier than trying to sort of dot all the way across the street. And we also know that the high school is there as well. So it's important to make sure that we're accommodating that. And also trying to get pedestrians to cross in the right areas, as opposed to right now, you can see there's sort of a beaten path in some of those places where maybe the kids are crossing and they don't really cross at the intersection, they cross halfway between Elm and Broadway. Not good, especially with the amount of traffic that's out there. The other thing too, as I mentioned, we're looking at transit amenities throughout the project. And what do I mean by transit amenities? What we're talking about there is having far side bus stops as opposed to near side bus stops. You know what I'm talking about with that? We want the buses stopping on the far side of a signalized intersection as opposed on the near side. Because if they stop on the near side, now there's traffic behind, someone's got a green light, they're letting people on and off. Let's get them on the other side of the intersection, right? So they can let the people off and the traffic can keep moving, things like that. Also, the city's been successful with bus rapid transit on Broadway. We want to see if we can accommodate that, as I mentioned, from Elm Street down to Chelsea Street. And then also bus transit priority, which essentially provides the traffic signals allowing these buses to have a priority going through. And let me say, well, why are we doing that? If the buses are moving, then that keeps the traffic moving, you know, as opposed to the buses stopping, everybody stopped behind them, people are getting in and out. So trying to make all of this work together. Just in terms of the project status and schedule, phase one was completed, data collection was done, operation and analysis at key intersections, conceptual layout, functional design report. As I said, it's a very detailed traffic study. We look at capacity, we look at accident, we look at operations, all of those things go in the functional design report. Funding assistance, very, I mean, a lot of cities and towns would be envious of the city of Everett to have a project of this magnitude on the tip in its final design stages, going to construction soon. The preliminary design has been finished. We did have a public outreach meeting. When I was going through that schedule in the beginning, we had a public outreach meeting in 2015, which was essentially a kickoff meeting. Essentially the project is in those stages. It was a little unfortunate. We didn't have a lot of the public to show up at the public hearing that Mass DOT conducted, but we can provide information. I know Greg's office at Public Works is available with information if the public needs it as well. We can provide handouts and things like that. So where are we moving forward? We're in the 75% design phase. The 75% design is scheduled to be submitted this summer. One of the big aspects of the project, the critical path of the project right now is going to be to complete the right-of-way process. The city also was very fortunate that Mr. St. Louis, while he was in Beverly, had a project of similar magnitude with a similar amount of easements that were necessary. I think we have about 300 easements we're going to need. And they're not extensive, but essentially, when you're using federal money, you need easements just for the contractor to put his foot on somebody's property to set the form to build a sidewalk. Mass DOT and the federal government require that you get an easement. So they're not extensive. Usually we request that the public would consider donating these easements as a civic gesture. It keeps the cost of the project down, keeps the cost of the city's cost down. Oftentimes, people will do that. They'll donate these easements, not a big inconvenience for the homeowner. But Greg has worked in Beverly, had a similar project with a similar amount of easements, and as it turns out, the gentleman from the Right-of-Way Bureau for Mass DOT, who worked with Greg in Beverly, has been assigned to Everett. So the learning curve is, we're at the top of the learning curve. We're doing good. The 100% design and PS&E submittal is scheduled for the spring of 2020. As I mentioned, the project is on the 2020 tip, which means that the project can be advertised anytime after after October 1st of 19 to September 30th of 20. That's the window. So if Mass DOT's reviews come back quickly, if the right-of-way process is completed quickly, anytime between October 1st of 19 to September 30th of 20, the project can be advertised for construction. So we're on the short track at this point. And as we're showing right here, advertising the fall of 2020, which means it would have to be advertised no later than September 30th of 20. So that's coming up pretty quick. And then generally, if they were to advertise it in the fall of 20, the contractor would get a notice to proceed, and he would probably start in the spring of 21. They're probably not going to come out. They might come out and do some minor work, drainage work, things that are underground, so they can button up for the winter. But they wouldn't want the road completely wide open for the winter time. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what we have going on. As I said, I'm sure you have plenty of questions, and we can try and answer those the best we can.
Councilor Della Sola?
Okay, I got a bunch of questions, and then I apologize, I have to run after my questions. I got a few of them. The project's going to start 2021, correct?
Start in 21?
Yes.
It could actually start in the fall of 20, depending upon when the Mass DOT issues the notice to proceed to them.
Let's hope so.
Just for our sake, we're saying, 2020, the spring of 21.
And how long do you think this project's going to last?
This project will probably last 3 years, would be my guess, because they have to shut down during the winter. Mass DOT is very specific about traffic management. There's a lot of traffic on Ferry Street. There's a lot of traffic on Elm Street. The road is narrow. We have buses. We have the school. They will likely restrict work during certain hours, during commuter hours. So it'll be very restrictive. So that's why that construction period will tend to last a little bit longer than it would if we were just sort of out in the country someplace and had free reign. But Mass DOT is very stringent about, traffic management and making all that work. They can't put the city in gridlock because of this project, so.
I know it's a long way, well, and sometime next year, we hope it starts. On the bike lanes, I know there's 2 or 3 ways you could do that. I'm sure you know yourself. On the bike lanes, I work in Cambridge and Somerville. People are going to get used to that when these bikes are on the road, but you have the bike lane with the painted lane for the bicycles, correct?
Right.
You have one that the bike lane is actually between the parked cars and the curbing in Cambridge. I've seen that also. But I think our streets are too narrow for that.
The road is really too narrow for all of that. Matter of fact, on one side of the road, if you looked at the cross-section that I showed, on one side of the road, so this is between Chelsea and Broadway. So you see on one side of the road, we have a bike lane. It's a dedicated bike lane. On the other side of the street, it's a sharrow. It has to be shared with the travel lane.
Correct.
We only have a 50-foot right-of-way.
Correct.
So, same thing like Beacon Street in Boston. They have that bike lane right next to the curb. There's a lot of controversy whether it works well, right? Because you have passengers opening doors, and a bike is not necessarily going to, if you're in the roadway, you might be looking for a driver to open the door. You may not necessarily be waiting for a passenger to open the door. The other thing, too, is when they get to the intersection, they have to then pull them into the front of all of those vehicles to cross a particular intersection. So we look at that really, really closely, as well as Mass DOT. The Complete Streets folks are all over, this bicycle accommodation, and how can we accommodate it safely and make it work, because it has to function with everything else that's going on. The problem with Ferry Street, it's not really wide.
Correct.
I mean, the wide point is between Elm and Broadway, and that's the area where we're actually able to have like a dedicated off-road bike facility as opposed to, having it on the street. So we're actually looking at that right now.
It's a great plan, don't get me wrong. The concerns of the residents are gonna be great when it's all done. The biggest concern, and we have time to have meetings in between that, and I'm sure you're sending letters out to notify them when it's happening, is when the construction is being done. This is gonna be the biggest concern on our end and your end also, when the contractor starts digging the road up and the detours and all that. So I know we could talk about more, I'm not gonna get into that now, because this is a little ways away. All utilities are being replaced, correct? Electric?
So what happens is, as part of the 25% design phase submission, which has already been made, every utility that is out in that street gets notified. And essentially, they say, hey, there's this project coming along, and if you have stuff you're gonna replace, you need to do it, you need to start planning it now, because once this road is done, there's a 5-year moratorium.
That's right.
They can't dig it up. Now, the city is also part of that notification, right? Because the city has utilities out there as well, which is why we're replacing the water main. But National Grid, cable, everybody who is out there gets notified. And they'll all be out there. If they have stuff to replace, they'll be doing it. I wanted to back up to your just in terms, you were talking about construction and that sort of thing. There'll be a lot of coordination. This is a tight area. This is not like, you're up on some road out in the
It's
countryside.
maybe one of the biggest projects we've seen
Oh, yeah.
in Everett when it comes to the roads. I mean, I work for Eversource, so I know, on the gas side, I know how it is. It's gonna be one of the biggest projects you're gonna see. 3 years going up Ferry Street and going down Elm. I live near Elm Street, so,
Yeah.
like Council said, it's gonna be both of our neighborhoods.
Oh, sure.
This project, so it's gonna
Fortunately,
be,
Mr. St. Louis, when he was in Beverly, had a project of similar magnitude. They reconstructed Rantoul Street and Cabot Street, Route 1A, right through the heart of Beverly.
So keep in mind that certainly this is a phased project. It's not 2 miles of open roadway at any given
Correct.
time.
Correct.
It's biting off, 4 blocks at a time and then moving to the next
you'll
section.
dig it up, new utilities, put the binder course in, move to your next one.
Exactly.
So at the end of the 2.5 years, you're gonna have Ferry Street all binder, Elm Street all binder with all utilities replaced,
Exactly.
and then go with your final course when,
Right. They can't
Every
put the city
utility
out
is
of business.
correct.
Yeah.
You get the fire department there, the schools are there, so the hours and all that's gonna be, and I know you do a great job at coordinate with everybody, on this project. So
Yep.
I'm not gonna hold up on, like I said, we have a lot of months ahead of us to ask questions and as a council as a whole. So I think it's a great design. I love, the best part is it's 18.5 million. We're paying 2.5 for a water main. Everything else is
That's right.
on the state.
Yeah, it's a pretty good deal. Actually, and even the water main at 2.5, which is the estimate, if the city was doing that and this project wasn't here, you'd be paying a lot more than that because you have to reconstruct the road after you put the water main in, right?
Correct.
So you don't have to do any of that.
So this is trees and everything. It's just from start to finish. And the cost goes over on the 18.5, nothing comes out of the taxpayers' money, correct?
The 2.5 for the water main or for the construction of the
The
roadway?
18.5, if it
Oh.
goes over, it's still
No
the
cost to
state's
the,
responsibility.
That's all federally and state funded. I mean, that's why we go through several iterations of the estimate, several, because they don't want the project to go over. But it is what it is at the end of the day. It is what it is, so.
And on the water main, the contractor be doing the water main, the contractor working on the streets, on Ferry Street, doing other utilities, we're gonna hire a contractor
No.
to do the water main, or we'll hire like a local contractor?
You won't have to do any of that, because what we're doing with this project is the water main will be what they call non-participating. So it'll be included with the road reconstruction project. It's non-participating work, which means that it's not part of what the state and the federal government are paying for.
Correct.
The city will establish a force account with Mass DOT for whatever that amount is. So let's say the water main comes in at $2.5 million. A force account will be set up from the city. It'll still be the road contractor who's the general contractor who's doing the road will do the water main as well. But when that is paid to the contractor, it comes out of the town, out of the city's account, for that non-participating work. So the city doesn't have to do any of that.
So one of the things Rich touched on earlier is that there is effectively a streetcar rail bed in the street. So
Right.
that would certainly, to a local water contractor, that would be a high cost to remove the rails, remove the cobbles, go through a concrete base
Right.
just to get to the water main.
Right.
So this really does, cut the project costs in half in regard to dealing with those utilities.
And just one more question on the water. I just thought of, when we put the new water main in, and, yourself, you're going from the main to the valve with the new copper. If the houses have lead, going from the valve to the house itself, will they be notified to replace it at that time? Because once it's up, you're not going to disturb the sidewalk to replace it.
So currently, the city is working with the MWRA on a lead services project. We have the first contract out now. As part of this roadway project, we would also look to address any iron services, any lead services, make sure that all gets removed from the roadbed so that we're not cutting into the road.
That'll be cost to the homeowner?
No, we can either pair it up with the MWRA program,
Okay,
or we could include it in these costs.
all right. I just thought of it and I figured I'd ask that question. All right, I'll yield the floor. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I appreciate you coming up here and educating us on this. Yeah, I live right off of Ferry Street, between Union Street and and Chelsea Street.
Okay,
So
okay.
I
You're going to be right in the middle of it.
60-plus years, I know firsthand all the issues down there, so I think it's great. I do have some questions regarding, first of all, you identified that the light at the intersection Union Street and Ferry Street is not necessary?
It didn't meet warrants, so we did a comprehensive traffic study for the entire project, all of Ferry Street and Elm Street. We look at all signalized intersections, and we also look at other intersections that may have high traffic volumes or have high accident occurrence or that sort of thing. So the intersection at Union did not meet traffic signal warrants. There's 9 warrants. You have to go through, amount of traffic, accidents, all that sort of thing, and it didn't meet warrants. Generally, if an intersection does not meet warrants, then 2 things happen. One, probably shouldn't have a traffic signal there, number 1, just because it doesn't meet warrants. Number 2, likely Mass DOT is not going to want to pay for a traffic signal if it doesn't meet the warrants. So we evaluated it, and by the way, the functional design report that's done as part of the project looks at all aspects relative to traffic. So it looks at capacity, it looks at accident, it looks at movement, it looks at all of those things. And we do a warrant analysis, and there's 9, as I said, there's 9 warrants, and it didn't meet any of the warrants. So generally, the conclusion is the signal shouldn't be there. So it was recommended that the signal be removed. Greg, I don't know.
Yeah, just keep in mind that just because it doesn't require a signal, that doesn't mean there's not going to be any improvements to the intersection. A lot of times there's going to be traffic calming measures like some of the bump outs and revisions to the geometry that otherwise improve the safety of the intersection. So if there are, we discussed rapid flashing beacons in regard to the pedestrians. A lot of those crossings will be safer, squarer, shorter.
That's what I was kind of getting at. You rapid?
Rapid flashing beacons.
Okay, now, is that the
like on
ability
Broadway.
for a pedestrian to be able to stop the
Exactly.
traffic to cross?
Exactly.
That's my concern.
Oh, yeah,
Because
exactly.
I can definitely understand, I'm a little confused only because of the, Union Street unfortunately, is a cutout that people will go down to the Parkway and completely avoid Chelsea Street and all the lights down around 16. But that's fine. If the studies have been done that indicate that it's not the car traffic, my concern
Peds.
is the pedestrian traffic.
Right.
Because again, that bus stop right at the intersection of Union and Ferry drops off our residents that live down off of Union Street, which involves approximately maybe about a half a mile to 2/3 of a mile down to the Chelsea line, and even that could be longer for all I know. So it's their ability to cross. There is no crosswalks between the intersection at Chelsea Street and Ferry Street and Union Street. That is the next crosswalk. So our residents being able to cross there, whether they're getting off the bus and crossing Ferry to go down into Orange Court, George Street, Cottage, I live on Cottage, or our residents getting off there and then walking down
Sure.
to Union, that the amount of foot traffic coming off the bus is something that I'm considered. And if we're looking at being able to give our residents the ability to change the lights so they can cross, as long as they're not being totally removed, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I just wrote down a rapid flashing beacon at Union, and to take a look at that, because if that's where, and if people are crossing there, we want to make sure it's safe for them to cross.
Yeah, granted, they've moved the bus stop when you turn off of Chelsea Street onto Ferry, and that's right down in the base of that intersection. But then you come up almost, on the opposite side would be the equivalent of 2 blocks up before the next bus stop, and that's that intersection right there. I'm also happy to hear that you're talking about stopping the buses on the other side of these intersections. I've always felt that has been part of the problem here, because it does block the traffic even when the lights change.
The bus on the near side.
That's right,
Yeah.
on the near side. So, moving that bus over to the far side and having the residents have a means to be able to cross, that's my concerns. So that addresses that. Shared bus and bike lanes, you mentioned that. What happens to the parking in those lanes?
So, we're between Chelsea Street and Broadway, right? So there'd be parking on one side of the street.
Where there's currently 2?
Sorry?
Where there's currently 2?
There is some parking on both sides of the street, but I think some of the parking on one side of the street is probably shouldn't be there.
I think only until we get to about the Glendale Park area,
Yeah.
it's two-sided.
So what we're doing is, first of all, when we look at this, we
Sorry, he
know.
had said Broadway and Chelsea Street. That's where I'm trying to understand this.
I think he means
You're
from
mentioning
Ferry Street from Chelsea to Broadway.
Right,
Is that what you mean?
right.
Ferry
Right.
Street from Chelsea to Broadway.
From Chelsea to Broadway. So what we do is, first of all, we know how critical parking is. So we don't remove any parking or eliminate the number of spaces, unless they're already illegal, or they shouldn't be there, too close to an intersection, things like that, too close to a hydrant. So what we've done is we've organized that parking. On the proposed cross-section for Ferry Street from Chelsea Street to Broadway is to have parking on one side, and then a bike lane on the other side. Again, we only have a 50-foot wide roadway. So if you look at what I have up on the screen there, you'll see we have a 7.5-foot sidewalk on both sides, and we have a 5-foot dedicated bike lane on one side, 2 11-foot travel lanes. The side of the roadway that has parking, we can't get a bike lane, so we have sharrows in the roadway. So remember I said earlier, we're trying to fit 10 pounds in a 1-pound bag.
Yeah, and I understand. It's when you then talked about the idea of a shared bus and bike lane.
Right.
See, again, I have talked to residents, though I think the program works, but where we've created a dedicated bus lane here, it did affect parking on a number of our residents.
Yeah, but it's from 4 to 9, 4 a.m. to 9 a.m.?
And were you talking about the same type of time frame?
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be an all-day thing. No, this would be, it's Bus Rapid Transit, which is a BRT, which essentially is, you're doing it during the commuter time in the morning.
But
But
of course,
that's-
the more streets that is involved, the more traffic is prematurely relocated during that time period, which now spreads the problem out to other neighborhoods.
Exactly. So that's not being proposed as part of this.
Okay.
That was just a discussion for the
That's why I
future.
was trying to get some clarification.
So what had happened with, and this cross-section that you see up on the screen, I don't have, if I actually had the engineered cross-section, I could show you, because in addition to this, we have to have offsets. So on one side of the street, we had a 2-foot offset. We had to change that to a 1-foot offset so we could add more space to the other side of the street. Again, we're constrained by, how much right-of-way we have. And even in Everett, I mean, someplace, if you have right-of-way issues out in, say, Middleton, you might have just land on the side, as opposed to in Everett, you got people's doorways right at the back of the sidewalk. what you got is what you got. You're not getting any more. So it's trying to fit all that stuff in. Right now, it's just a parking lane, bike lane, and we are making that section, so it's, at some point in the future, if that was something that the city wanted to do, we got the room to do similarly what you did on Broadway during the commuter time. But that's not being proposed here at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And really, the last question I have is, if everything goes according to Hoyle, we started in the fall of 2020, the project's primarily being done on 2021, what are we looking at a projected completion date?
So, I think earlier, I had mentioned that this is probably like a 3-year construction period. Greg, how long did it take Rantoul Street?
1A in Beverly took about 3 years. But again, the period in front of any given business or residence was several months. And it was, one side of the street and then the other side of the street. And they were, specifically working around businesses. Does someone shut down for the summer? Then we can impact them more. And, work with each individual business and resident to try to accommodate that schedule too. Depending on the contractor, they always have a choice of how they're going to meet the schedule. A lot of times they'll have one crew on the north end of the project, another crew on the south end of the project. They're able to, work with their subs, do curbing in one area, do roadway in another. So if they come with, they're going to have to propose a schedule to DOT, and, the city will have its resident on board during that process too. We'll be able to look at that schedule, what works, what doesn't work, and really do what's best for the city.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilman McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick follow-up questions, because a lot of my questions have been answered. Greg, Council President Del Sol had talked about water services and you had talked about implementing them. My question is, from the house to the sidewalk is the property owner's responsibility. Will we notify the property owners along Ferry Street that this may be a good time for them to look at their service, so that we're not going back and ripping up sidewalk patches after the work is done?
Yeah. So as part of the MWRA-led program,
Yep.
the city is allowed to work with the homeowners to replace the full service from the meter to the main. So that would be our preference, so that we don't end up with two dissimilar materials where the city replaces its side with copper, but the homeowner still has a lead service. Now, certainly they could opt out of that, but we would certainly work to try and get all of the lead out of the city.
Okay, so we're going to work with each individual property owner and let them know, because that's something that comes up quite frequently, as you know. Water service breaks, and it's whose side of the curb box is it on, that it's who's responsible for it. So that was one of my questions, that just to make sure that we can do that. And another question that I have, and I think all of my colleagues have heard this from business owners down that end of the city, is what can we do currently to try to mitigate some of the damage from today? The Ferry Street section from really all of Ferry Street, but from Glendale Square down to the
Malden is exceptionally brutal.
Right, and Councilor DePiero knows what I'm talking about, and, we both get approached by this probably frequently. It's really bad condition, and I'm just wondering if I don't know what can be done. I don't know, because as Mr. Benevento said, underneath there there's train tracks, and there's cobblestone, and there's a whole lot of stuff, so you can't really go in and grind it, I guess, and then I'm not sure what the solution would be, but I know that a lot of residents and business owners have approached myself and my colleagues and asked, hoping that that's not going to stay like that until the year 2021, until construction starts. What can we do to help them out down there?
So certainly we've been continuing to work with National Grid to redress their patches and go back and do mill and fills in some of the areas that settled. I think that's had a positive effect in some of the areas between Broadway and the Malden line. We can look at some of the worst things and see where we can do some mill and overlay. We're looking at that type of treatment in the 2nd Street corridor right now, where we don't have the funds to take on 2nd Street as a full, truck road That would be its own, multi-million-dollar project. And as we try to advance the Silver Line in that area and the businesses and the land gets gentrified and redeveloped, we're hoping that we can work with those landowners and improve the width of the Second Street corridor so that we can include some of these complete streets items, wider sidewalks, and as part of the commercial triangle redevelopment, really make that a corridor that is attractive to redevelopment. So if we can do some mill and overlay in Second Street in the near term, that'll buy us some years patching some of those potholes. So if we can do some mill and overlay in selective areas, we can take a look at that.
I'm sorry.
That same application that we're going to try on Second
On
Street.
Second Street, you'll
we're
try
also
to
gonna
implement
apply
it onto Ferry Street?
We can apply it in a limited capacity on Ferry Street.
Is there a log of some sort of how often we have requested National Grid to come out and fill in overlay their hot top patches or trenches currently? Because I'm being told that there's, and I don't know, Councilor DePiero might be able to comment, but I'm being told that there has been no work by National Grid to be able to go back and fill in some of their potholes and sinkholes and trenches in a significant amount of time. I don't know if that's been 3 months or 6 months or whatever, but there has been no meaningful approach or attempt to try to keep Ferry Street reasonably passive for vehicles.
So certainly at the end of last year, before the union went on strike, we had them address a number of the areas on Ferry Street that had settled. They also went down to Spring Street near the stadium, did a wide swath there. We looked back at any permits over the last 5 years and basically worked with National Grid representatives to say, these are the recent projects you've done, and of these projects, these are the ones we want you to look at a second time. And so they're still working through that process. It's I don't think they've done it as rigorously in the past as we're going to make them do so moving forward. I also think that, with all of the government re-regulation that's going on right now, requiring engineers to oversee National Grid on each project, I think they're going to realize that there's a new standard that they need to meet.
So are they responsible for the condition of Ferry Street until the start of this next phase of the project? Is that what it is?
To the extent it's adjacent to their trench,
Sure.
then, there's a 5-year window where if their trench settles, they are responsible through the DPU to address their trench.
Okay, so I would, and again, this is not, I don't know if we want to excuse Mr. Benevento, this is more about current condition, so I don't know if we want to excuse him, customary thanks. I actually don't have any further questions for you, Mr. Benevento. I appreciate your presentation tonight.
Well, I had time for another 50 or 60 questions.
I think we're going to have those
Might be the
down.
only one.
I think we're going to have those down the road, and I think we have several months to be able to have those conversations. And I know you're relatively available for phone calls and so forth.
Yep.
And we talk to you often, so thank you for coming tonight and giving your presentation. But I just want to talk to Mr. St. Louis about where we are today and how we're able to satisfy some of the concerns for the residents in that area.
As long as it's relevant to the piece, which I do think it is. Ferry Street is in very rough shape currently, and if we can perhaps remedy the situation temporarily, some of those rough spots, I'd be ecstatic. So,
Yeah.
continue,
again,
Counselor.
And certainly, I know National Grid, even at, I think it's Belmont Street, they've been doing some more
Good.
valve work.
I'll get you.
So we will continue to reach out to them to address those trenches. If there's other areas in the corridor that are particularly bad, we can take a look at those and see if our mill and overlay contract this year can address that. The city hasn't had mill and overlay contracts in the last 5 years, I believe, so this is a pavement management treatment that we'll be hopefully embracing more moving forward.
Okay, so then can I just ask that you keep us in the loop and maybe via email or phone call in the next month, say, and that you can give us an assessment of the Ferry Street corridor and how we can move forward to be able to rectify some of the issues and get some of the bigger trenches or potholes and settlements repaved for the summer months so that businesses and homeowners alike can not hear the rattling of cars on Fair Street, and I'm hearing all kinds of different things going on. So if you can just keep us in the loop and try to work with us on rectifying some of these issues, I think we will greatly appreciate it as a city council as a whole.
And certainly, as residents can reach out through our 311 system and create pothole tickets, we do address those as they're received.
Yep, no, that's fair enough, but when they call us, I think they think that that's the same as calling 311, is calling their city councilor. So, and I know, again, we get approached often by this issue in regard to this matter. So hopefully you'll work with us over the next month to try to assess it and try to figure out a plan to move forward and try to get it resolved. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. St. Louis.
Thank you.
Councilor Della Sola did say that he was pleased with the answers he got, and said he was fine with the piece being referred back to sponsor. Where it is specifically about the project itself, I gave a little leeway in this conversation. We can have further discussions about the current condition down the road. Motion made and seconded that we recommend the item be referred back to sponsor. All in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Meeting adjourned.